Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to cover pretty much the end of our material. We're going to go through the recent decades. A little bit of a disclaimer, when I put this slideshow together, it was a year and a half ago. So it was firmly 2012. So we're going to talk only about art up to 2012. So there's that. But so as this is pretty much our last full week of class, I want you to know that I went through and I updated all of the grading stuff, and all of that stuff is entered. What I haven't done yet is gone through my email firmly to tease out any of the papers there. So if you emailed me a paper and your grade isn't showing up in Blackboard, there could be still a bit of a delay. Sorry on that. But for this week, you'll notice that there are 2 quizzes open. I told you in the beginning of the semester that we were going to be taking 5 quizzes, and the lowest grade of those was going to be dropped, and or 6 quizzes, excuse me, and the lowest grade of those was going to be dropped, giving you a score of 20 points towards your final grade for the quizzes. Now, we've only taken 4 quizzes, right? So we have one quiz that's kind of a little bit of content about the recent lectures. And then the second quiz is just kind of a summation. And the reason I'm doing that is because you might have done really badly on one of the quizzes earlier and you don't know if you're going to be able to, basically I'm saying I want to give you the option of dropping your lowest quiz score, but in order to do that, I want some questions answered. So it's kind of like a questionnaire. And the same thing can be said for the last response paper that we have. This is a question I always like to ask of my students. So I'm really curious to hear your responses. It makes me excited to do this. So it makes me feel like we're in conversation, because we are. And so that's what we have this week. So it might seem kind of daunting because, 2 quizzes in 1 paper. Who is this guy? We have our final next week. But actually the paper and one of the quizzes are just your responses. You don't really have to think that much about our course material. Like, how are you responding to the conversations in this course? That's what those are about. Anyway, that's 2 minutes and 48 seconds of that kind of work, and now we're going to move on into today's lecture, and we're going to be talking about the recent decades. So we've talked about art leading up to 1994, and the last time I showed you a new work of art, it was Angela Bullock's work, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But what was really instrumental about where we ended last time was this proximity and activity of the viewer. So for the whole of art, you make art for an audience. That's the reason why art is made. It's a conversation that somebody feels to say out loud in a language of visual production. And so, but that audience was always passive. They were always kind of standing there, or you just read a book. But this new art, really the last 30 years, was demanding that the audience kind of move their body a little bit, get involved a little bit, think about what they were doing in that situation, in that mode of being. And it's that tenet in art that really gets teased out in certain artistic developments in the last 20 years, kind of the generation of artists that came after that first activation of the audience that we saw in like Alan Capral's work, or Joseph Beuys's work to a certain extent, and Marina Abramovich, where the audience member has to pass through a doorway made of Marina Abramovich and Ulay. And so this generation that we're about to get into, they're thinking about the audience differently. But another thing, or rather another branch, so not an entirely different aspect, but another branch of this conversation goes into the idea of our bodies. So the audience is being made aware of their physical body. And in the art of the last two lectures, I've shown you work that is racially sensitive, that it is sexually sensitive, it is religiously sensitive. It's sensitive work. It's pushing buttons on purpose because it wants to elicit a conversation about something it sees in the world. And so that's the other tangent that we're picking up on in the most recent art, is this idea of constantly referencing the body. So I guess real simply, it all goes back to the body. Artists are considering their body as political identities in space, and other artists are considering the bodies of their audience members as they engage with their artwork. You know, Manet, Monet, Cézanne, they thought about how people were going to look at this work, but they weren't thinking about what it felt like to be that person, the author, making it, in the same regard as we're going to see in this week's lecture. So it's all changed. So that's kind of my introduction to the summation, although I'm going to give you a little bit of a summation and review next week. So this idea that I'm talking about, specifically the one where the audience is physically active, is called relational aesthetics. Now, this is kind of a problematic word when you get into the esoterica of museum curators and such, but for our purposes, it's a good marker in time. The development of this term was mirrored with these certain developments, and it elicited a conversation in the critical sphere, but it identified a certain aspect of cultural production, artistic production at this time. Now, this is what this guy, Nicolas Bourriard, says about it. Relational aesthetics, and I don't know why there's 2 commas there. Excuse the grammatical error. I get 1 point off for that. A set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context, rather than an independent and private space. And so, at this point, everything becomes art practice, or there's a possibility for everything to become art practice. So instead of the artist saying, I can take this urinal, turn it on its side, and call it art, people are saying, nah, you can go in there buying that thing. I just said nah real loud. You can buy that thing, and that can be your art. We're not going to talk about pluralism. I want to keep going with this. This guy, Rik Tiruvannaja, makes a variety of different sculptures. Most of them engage with our sense of experiencing the artwork. Most recently, he made a series of outdoor sculptures that were covered in a mirror surfacing, so that we couldn't see things, taking obviously from Robert Morris, which I hope all of you, I hope he sprang to mind. But here, in a work that made Tiruvannaja's name, he is in the gallery himself. This is him on the right, with one of his assistants on the left. He's cooking food. Specifically, he's cooking pad see ew. Now, he's doing this because this is the food that he and his family ate in their home. And he's brought this culture, this action of the home, and instead of making a painting about it, about what it was like for him to be in the kitchen watching his mom and his grandmother or his aunt or father making this food, instead he is bringing the act of making the food and eating the food into the gallery space. And the audience is invited to eat the food. And he just cooks the whole time, just hanging out, cooking. I mean, he's probably doing a variety of other things, but generally when you're feeding a gallery full of people, you're cooking a lot of the time. So this is one of those projects where the artwork isn't the dirty dishes at the end of it. If you walk into the gallery after the performance, you will see the dirty dishes, so they're a component of it. But another component of it is the making of the food. Another component is the identification of Mr. Cervenaja as a specific component in cultural heritage. So he specifically, I think, given his time period, is given he is asked to bring the conversation of race into the fore, because when you're dealing in a fairly homogeneously Caucasian, European, or American audience, the presentation of a last name like Cervenaja is going to elicit at least a conversation. And so what he's doing is saying, like, I'm going to skip any kind of awkward conversation about how you view my body, and I'm just going to give you this food and see how you view my culture. So it's a really, it kind of combines the two conversations we're having right now. Now here we get back to Angela Bullock's Betaville. I guess what I should have said, let me backtrack. This is Cervenaja's performance in 1990. In 2002. He did this initially in 1990. So, Angela Bullock's Betaville. We talked about this last week. When the audience member walks into the space, they sit down on that orange bench, and upon their weight, there's a sensor activated, and it draws those orange lines there. Ellen Gallagher, Skin Natural from 1997. Now, Miss Gallagher is dealing with issues of racial identity. She is a black woman, and a black American woman, and she has seen a lot of cultural representations of her identity in the popular media. A lot of people, all people, see themselves reflected back to them in some sort of cultural form. What Miss Gallagher is honing in on specifically is the way that commerce is associated with the way that black American women are sold beauty products, but at the same time, in the same newspapers that are selling them wigs that are sold under the names of Skin Natural and Valor, there are likenesses that use this stereotypic panel, or the stereotypic eyes as pictured on the panel on the right-hand side of this work. Or not a panel, excuse me, they're not two separate things, they're one sheet of paper. So this idea that, in one page of this newspaper, black women are characterized as having these googly eyes, as it were, or big red lips, as is indicated in other works by Miss Gallagher. Here she's dealing specifically with the eyes. But then they also have the audacity of telling me, like, that you're calling me names with these googly eyes, and then you're telling me that I should be buying products that you're advertising. And so she deliberately blacks out the eyes of the models pictured here to bring those over. And you can see down at the bottom, there is one that is actually embossed a little bit more with kind of a mask-like feature. Lisa Yuskevich, Couch from 1997. Miss Yuskevich is dealing with an idea of consumption in a lot of ways. Actually, excuse me, this is being cut off. So the decadence of the figure's presence, the exaggeration of certain aspects of her body. Not to say that women's bodies don't look like that or are not shaped like that, but Miss Yuskevich has a likeness to having this belly that looks specifically like it could be pregnant, but for those people who know what pregnant women look like, the belly usually sits a little lower than that. And if you basically the belly is too perfect. and her breasts are also too perfect. But in that same regard, we have what seemed to be her undergarment made of candy or marbles. I'm not really sure what this is. I've seen this in person. They do look like glass beads, but they also do almost appear to be edible. And so I think there is this that's deliberate on Yuskovich's part. She wants to bring the viewer in, thinking about the consumption of this, but also at the same time bringing them into a woman's genitalia. So in the same way that, going way back to the first chapter that I assigned in the reading and also our first lecture with Courbet's Origin of the World, bringing the viewer in specifically to this thing that is defining a lot of our culture, this like our relationship to sex, the way that we envision each other's bodies. It's something we are preoccupied with, and so Yuskovich is addressing this in also the same way that Ang addressed it with his Grand Odalisque, where he added vertebrae to elongate her body, making her seem more unnatural and therefore that much more of an ideal. But where Ang was saying this is an ideal to aspire to, Yuskovich is saying this is an ideal that I'm questioning. So there's a lot of similarities between the conversation here and Gallagher's conversation, where they're presenting the likenesses of women, but in these ways that are riffing on the stereotypical images or likenesses of women as seen in, say, pornographic material or advertising material. There's lots of different ways to look at that. All right, I normally shy away from works that I think are deliberately shocking, but this one I happen to like, just because I think shock and shock value is something that's always associated with contemporary art, and really, yeah, art can be shocking, but when art is thought-provoking and is solidly built or conceived. I'm saying all this with this ridiculous picture on here, so I'm going to shut up. I'll save that rant for some other time. This is Rob Pruitt's Cocaine Buffet. Oh man, excuse me. From 1998. So in 1998, to give you a little bit of a historical marker, the art world was a party scene. This was something that was kind of born in New York. Actually, the abstract expressionists were known to be great partiers in that they were drunk a lot of the time. And then in the 80s, when things got to be big money, there were lots of parties with champagne and limousines. And in the 90s, drugs and alcohol, specifically the overuse of cocaine, the use of cocaine, there's never it's always an overuse of cocaine, was prevalent at these parties. And so Pruitt, in response to these relational aesthetic ideas that Baudrillard put out and that Turvanaja and Angela Bullock employ, he's saying, okay, it's nice that Turvanaja brings his culture into this gallery. I'm going to bring my culture into the gallery. And Pruitt is known to riff on consumerism and modes of decadence. And so he's pinpointing specifically this like white bread New England aesthetic of like doing blow at fashion-y parties. And I think it's a really effective work. And like I said, I have thought about this a lot, and there's a lot of more shocking works that I could have shown you over the course of this term, works that are designed to be shocking, and very often those are really boring to me. I want you guys to be able to look at art and not anticipate a shock, but anticipate something that's thought-provoking, or maybe not. Like going to the movies or reading a book. Sometimes they're really awesome, sometimes they're not that awesome, but when they're really awesome and really exciting and really well done, that's when they're good. And quite honestly, in this final essay, you might tear this apart and say, like, Chris Stigler's telling us that this is good. The activity here, I'm not saying is good. What I am saying is good is this as an art project. Yeah, so this week is all about me showing you things that are kind of fashiony, vapid, consumerist. I think when I was putting this this lecture together, was having some specific thoughts about consumerism, because here we have Vanessa Beecroft's VB35 from 1998. Miss Beecroft is a filmmaker and photographer, and she often in her work employs women that fit a specific role. In her early work, she employed women that had a more relaxed air about themselves. They were all very attractive in their own right, but they were more the girl next door. And for this series of work that she did around a show at the Guggenheim, she employed women that were defined as models, and models that, and that kind of runs the gamut of term, right? In art history, a model is seen as this muse. It's the inspiration for the work. And in our contemporary consumerist society, a model is effectively a moving mannequin, especially the closer you get to the fashion industry. Models are respected for their role in the industry, but that's the aesthetic that they fill. A model isn't in the room when the garment is being designed. A model, the form of the model's body is in the mind of the designer. Whereas in this classical sense of the model, there's much more of a proximity. And even in the women imaged in Courbet's paintings and Manet's paintings, they knew those women. Courbet often had affairs with his models, as did a lot of painters. Manet did not do that. Anyway, Beecroft, in employing these models, is bringing this conversation about the consumption of female bodies into an art viewing space. Last week I showed you works where artists appropriated billboard space. This is, I think, an inverse of that, where Beecroft is taking what is typically viewed on billboards, beautiful, scantily clad women with unrealistic shoes and equally unrealistic hair for a bathing suit, and putting them into an art viewing space. But so why the nude models then? Well, the nude model brings much more to the fore this conversation about the directness of an artwork, or how direct an artwork needs to be. I mean, Janine Antoni gnawing away at a block of chocolate and a block of lard is pretty direct. And so how do you make that next step? It's 1998. It's not 10 years prior. And so Beecroft, might have seen all of the models in the room and as a last minute decision said, I need you, and you to take off your clothes. You can see that they are still wearing the same footwear. So this burden of the fashion industry, or the weight of cultural identity as a person involved with fashion, is continued here with the shoes. Vanessa Beecroft. She is currently working very heavily with Kanye West, to give you a sense of the fact that a lot of these people I'm showing you are still very active artists. They're all still alive. I think it's interesting where their work is now, because Kanye West deals a lot with the images of people and also the culture of consumption that we currently live in, and I think that it's it's a good fit to see these two working together. John Curran, Hobo. John Curran and Lisa Yuskevich are both affiliated with the painting school at Yale University. John Curran was there as a teacher, and he instructed Lisa Yuskevich in that program, where Yuskevich deliberately ramps up a plasticity of the human form. She wants the belly to feel super unnatural. Curran wants his forms to seem, specifically in their bodies, kind of overly sumptuous. He's engaging with the same conversation, but instead of making allusions to, or like kind of leading the eye around with more direct attention grabbers, like the underwear that Yuskevich's model was wearing, with the pearls or the candies or the marbles, the shiny orbs. Curran is just putting out this incredibly overly exaggerated sumptuous form. You know, he like the weight of her breasts as they hang down, the angle of her neck that's kind of unnatural but still like presents a very direct face, which is important in the conception of beauty. You know, we define beauty, and this was known in 1999. We define beauty by seeing faces straight on, and by those faces being symmetrical. So it's important that Curran has actually torqued this model's head, this hobo's head, in such a way that her face is straight on with the viewer, even though it doesn't necessarily match the curvature of her body, because the curvature of her body is unnatural. This is also enforced by this rucksack that she has hanging from that stick that we caricaturely see the kind of hobo carrying. That the weight of that, the size, the shape of that bag looks an awful lot like her breasts. That's a direct reference. Curran is pointing this out very specifically. What does it mean to have a man make this statement? Did that infuriate women? No, because at this point, the women that he was working with very closely as a peer, as a colleague, as an instructor, they saw him as an equal in the conversation. He had read the discourses on feminism. He understood where the women's movement was coming from. He is a child of it. And so this idea of tearing down masculinity or constantly questioning any of the presentations of the female body by men has washed away. Women would be certainly skeptical if they'd never heard of him, but because of his connectivity with the community, he's revered. He's regarded as a very good painter. Although lately his works have gotten a little more pornographic, and it's kind of weird. Tracey Emin. Now in 2000, Tracey Emin was part of a group of artists in London referred to as the YBAs, or the Young British Artists. Of this, Damien Hirst was one. Obviously, our author, Will Gompertz, deals with them in the text. Jake and Dinos Chapman, whose work I showed you last week, is also them. Tracey Emin won as well. In 2000, YBAs were everywhere. They were making hand-over-fist money. They were being whisked away to all these parties. They were getting delightfully hammered at all of these parties, so much so that in around 2001, pretty much all of them went sober in this really funny movement. I was in and around London a bit during these years. I obviously didn't know them because I was younger than that, but I knew of them, revered them as a young art dork. And this Polaroid makes a lot of sense for who Tracey Emin is. There are other works of hers that are more masterpiece-driven, but I want you to understand who Tracey Emin is. She's a woman who is an artist who has made a name for herself at this point in 2000 of presenting her sexual identity to her public. Her work is about her identity as a woman, and that is a woman who's very sexually confident and is willing to talk about that in public. And so here she is in this large format photograph that looks a lot like a Polaroid because it's a big Polaroid, with the format on the bottom, as you see, with just cash. She's British, that's British money, and she says cash, and she's pushing all of this cash towards her genitalia. And she's saying, I've got it all is the title, but she's kind of looking down and mashing this money into her body. And she's kind of associating the genitalia with this money in a way that seems very problematic to my eyes. And this is interesting because it marks a point where her work does begin to switch, and her conversations about her sexual identity quiet down, and her work moves into a different direction. Also a member of the YBAs is a female photographer by the name of Sam Taylor Wood. Sam Taylor Wood makes a lot of serial photographs where she takes, she selects a conceptual idea and she makes a body of work all surrounding that idea. This is not that. That's just what she does. This is a video. It's called Still Life, and this is a video where she records a still life decomposing, blooming twice, actually, with two different kinds of bacteria, fungus in both measures, excuse me. And then it loops back around. Stylistically, it's derived from Dutch still lives and French still lives and German still lives and Italian still lives from forever, because human beings have always, in their practice of becoming artists, have used fruit, statues, and all this other stuff to make pictures. And so Taylor Wood is doing the same thing, this very art historically conscious idea. That's not a conversation that's also fallen away. It's very art historically conscious, but yet it's adding a measure of duration, which then calls into question the body of the viewer, right? The viewer has to sit there for the 12 minutes or 8 minutes, I can't exactly remember right now, 8 minutes of this video to watch it decompose. So you're asked to do that in the same way that when a bell rang in Alan Caprow's happenings, you stood up and you walked to the other room, or you didn't, and you were obstinate and didn't have fun. All right. It's super fun to talk about paintings that I've seen. It's even more fun to talk about installations that I've walked through, because for me it's kind of like reliving a really awesome roller coaster, and this is going to prove, if I haven't proved it yet, that I'm a super dorky art guy. When I was a young man, I was interning at Tate Gallery, who I've referenced a few times in our lectures, and there was this prize that was going on called the Turner Prize, and this work was in it. I don't want to get into the Turner Prize. I'm almost positive Gompertz covers it, at least in a footnote, but I can't remember that off the top of my head. Anyway, it's just an art prize. And this was in it, and it was exhibited at the Tate Museum in London, and so I got to walk through it a bunch of times. And what it was a variety of different rooms, none of them stylistically similar. So one room was entirely different than the other. The back room of an office, this hallway on the left, this storage room on the right. None of them seemed to make sense. And so you go from room to room, always walking through a door you never felt comfortable going through, and then into an environment that you had no understanding of, or insofar as you had no idea how to behave. And so in this really exquisite example of installation work, it pulls your body into different ways of thinking about itself in an environment, about its safety, about its body consciousness. You know, are you going to bump into somebody when you walk into this room? Are you going to fall down when you walk into this room? Is it going to be dark or well lit or too well lit? And the thing that this is a style that Nelson deals with quite regularly, and the thing that I liked or appreciated a lot about this specific work was that it referenced the idea of a museum. In this back storage room that I'm showing you here in the larger image on the right, it actually kind of tucks under the one on the left. He has grouped like items that are items that can be found kind of anywhere. So it's a variety of walkie-talkies stacked near one cell phone, or a stack of flashlights near one candle. And so these are things that light paths. These are things used to communicate at a distance. And that's something that museums do. And so all of his installations are site-specific. All of them employ this ability to pull you out of your own self and put you into an environment you have no idea what to anticipate. That's a fun way to do it. Also, as a young art dork in London, I went to my first contemporary art gallery, and I saw this painting. I actually had seen this painting reviewed in Time Out magazine, and I got really, really excited because it was going to be a beautiful weekend. I had some free time, and I was going to go and explore a contemporary art gallery. And I'd only ever seen art in museums, where you are kind of told to walk at a slower pace. You're supposed to revere the works on the wall, knowing full well that somebody chose them specifically to be on that wall. But in a contemporary art gallery, it's a little bit different, because it's pretty much just a fancy store. Some of them are different, so don't take that with every gallery you walk into, but everything's for sale. And so oftentimes that means there's a lot of like items in the same room, but not in some fun, creative way like Mike Nelson in the previous slide, but in a way that's like, this guy makes all of these works, made all these works at the same time, thinking of the same ideas. And so a lot of the paintings in this show looked a lot like this: a white ground with a very simple brown image, quickly but adeptly put onto the surface. And so I go up to this door of this gallery called, I think it was called Modern Pictures, and the newspaper said nothing about having to ring a bell. And so I got there and was convinced I was not allowed to go in, and I walked away. And then I decided, no, I have to be able to go in. It's published in this newspaper. I'm going to go in. I turn around, I walk back, I muster up all the courage I could have spared. I was really awkward when I was this age. And I rang the bell, and they buzzed me in. Because it's a store, you're allowed to go in. And so they buzz me in, I walk in, and it's not a store in the way that we understand, where there's going to be an attendant waiting to answer your questions or help you out. It's a store where they want you to have as much time with a thing as you need, and if you want anything, you can just come over to them and get them, but they're not really there for you. They're there for some other reason. And so they didn't care. They went back to their offices, and there I was in this room, and I stayed there for about 40 minutes because I didn't know what to do. And then I left, feeling incredibly awkward, but also very accomplished, and now I go into these things all the time. Super easy, really mellow. Sometimes they have bathrooms, sometimes they don't, but that's a story for another time. Barnaby Furnace, Hamburger Hill, from 2002. Barnaby Furnace is taking a language of image making that was seen as simplistic, or a simplified way of seeing things, and bringing it into, this is my read of this, I don't know what he would say of this, and bringing it into a painting, specifically a painting about a history. So Hamburger Hill, as the Confederate flag being waved by the man in the front row, is a battle, or a story of a battle in the American Civil War. And what Furness here is doing is saying, okay, I want to take this historical event and turn it into a painting, but that painting is going to be made in 2002. And so it can't look like a video game necessarily, or I just gave it away. It can't look like a traditional history painting, like, say, Washington crossing the Delaware, or the Oath of the Tennis Court. No, it's got to look like something of our day and age. And so he looked at this hyper-violent strain of video games and used that language and implied it into this. Now, the reason I'm saying that it's video games and not movies is because the graphics he's employing here, the sharpness of his lines, is something that technology in 2002 wasn't really at. I mean, even The Matrix looks like it was kind of drawn by hand to today's eye. And so in video games, the players of those video games are much more willing to give over this level of understanding to the game itself. They're willing to say, like, yes, this looks like a hallway, even though it doesn't. It's just like squares drawn on a wall. So that's Barnaby Furness. Julie Meritou, this is her work. She employs a lot of the same tactics that Pollock used in his drip paintings, but she slows them down to such a degree that she's able to get a very, very precise handle on them. And so instead of having to get really super close to see the way that one layer of paint kind of overlaps with another layer of paint, Meritou gives you a specific line, and you can get right up in there and figure out how all that stuff relates. Her current work deals with much larger panels of color. So like this brown square in the center here would actually come to take up the entire quadrant in this one corner, or something to that effect. Yinka Schonebar, who since the production of this has become a knight in the British court. He is a British citizen born to African parents, and he was trying to figure out a way to rectify those two identities, because his family was very much of their homeland, and he was very much of a young urbanite set. And so he looked at this moment where, I mean, because so he basically begins to appropriate Victorian heritage, where Britishness was quintessentially British, and also when there was a very large conversation between the African continent and the British Empire. Well, really, it's like the 1400s, 15th century through the 18th century. And so, but he kind of pinpoints the Victorian period and makes these really lavish costume works that are a fusion of African textiles with British costumery. But he gives them these flourishes because he says, you can't just appropriate the costume or the fabric, you have to appropriate some of the stylings. And that includes heavy embellishments. There are a lot of plays on gender and gender roles in his work, I can say. Ryan Trecarton, A Family Finds Entertainment, from 2004. I recommend, because I want you to actually do this on YouTube and not through our course, just look this video up on YouTube. All of his work is available on YouTube, so check it out. Ryan Tricardo. 2005, a young lady by the name of Dana Schutz made this work, Gravity Fanatic. This work, I always like to say, embodies a sense of anxiety, but also a notion of beauty, or that is really prevalent in the painting of this time period. And what I say with that, with anxiety, you have this figure who is yearning so hard to feel against, or feel a sense of something that's so normal, or something that's so normative as gravity, that he is trying they, I keep imbuing this with a male embodiment, they are literally affixing their bodies to the ground with tape, with nails, with all of these other grotesque elements. And you can say, oh my gosh, how does Mr. Stigler think that this is beautiful with that person's lip, that the extension of that person's lip, or that must hurt so badly to be in that position. To be in the presence of this work is to notice that it's a very, very decadent painting. Schutz is a master at the application of surface, and as such just really knocks these guys out of the park when you see them in person. Them meaning all of her paintings, because I've seen quite a few of them. She shows fairly regularly in New York City, which is awesome. I can't buy her works because there's a waiting list, but yay for the people that can. I hope they show them in museums someday. So yeah, Dana Schutz. Neil Rauch. Neil Rauch is a German painter, and Leporello from 2005. Now, take a long look at this painting and just look at it. Try and make sense of how the image is stacked. What you can't see that well in the digital mashing of this really also decadent painting is the way that space recedes and comes out visually into your frame or your sense of person. And so where Schutz is referencing a body of a character that she is putting in a painting and pinning down to the ground, Neil Rauch is giving you these figures and a sense of a narrative, and narratives quote unquote bring us into stories, but then he's giving you this push-pull of perspectival space that does the same with your perception of distance. Kehinde Wiley, Kehinde Wiley. This is Kehinde Wiley. Kehinde Wiley is a black American man who lives and works in New York City. He makes pictures of young black men in poses that are appropriated from painting history. This is a pose, I believe, of from a Van Eyck painting. He was a popular 19th century artist from Britain. Here, Wiley appropriates the stance, but allows the model or the character to be seen in a normal costume, or a costume more appropriate to their character or contemporary society. This is what someone would have been seen wearing in 2006. And Kehinde Wiley has made, he embellishes the surfaces with these really, really lovely patterns. These are very, very sumptuous works. They're really cool to see in person, but I can say that I've seen a lot of them and they all look exactly the same. And I've been seeing these things for way too long for them to still look exactly the same. All right, last 5 years, last 10 minutes. Valerie Haggerty. This isn't even really the last 5 years. This goes back farther, and yeah, this is the last 5 years ago. Valerie Haggerty. What you might not be able to recognize immediately is that Miss Haggerty is taking an image of a famous painting by artist Mark Rothko. Some of you, those of you who included Mark Rothko examples in text you submitted for this class, will recognize the kind of surface structure. The rectangles floating in space, color field paintings. A few of you use those words. Those are the words I'm using right now. Haggerty, however, seems to have burned the bottom of this painting. She's doing this as a way to instigate the conversation about, the museum, the ruins of the cultural institutions as we knew them at this time. Remember, I showed you. I am blanking on his name. I'm sorry. That's an example that popped in my head, and then his name evaded me. The painting with the four horsemen that had a very similar orangish yellow palette from last week's lecture. The name is going to come to me the moment I stop recording this lecture. I got to keep going. Josh Klein in 2007. I said his name horribly. Josh Klein in 2007. Josh Smith. Josh Klein is a contemporary artist who currently has work up in New York City right now that's getting a lot of attention. And I don't know why I not only mispronounced his name first, but then repeated it even though it's not the artist we're looking at. This is Josh Smith. Josh Smith is a painter and printmaker, and he works in series in the same way that photographers, as I mentioned earlier, like Sam Taylor Wood, work. He, in this series of works, was making paintings that were quote-unquote abstract. He was just saying, I'm making abstract paintings, straight up. And so he makes abstract paintings. And he makes them in such a way that they're kind of throwaway paintings. And I saw this work in a show, and the show sold out very quickly, and then he made more paintings and put those paintings in the show because it didn't matter. Abstract paintings are like candy in a store. Richard Aldrich. What is difficult to see in this work is that so the bottom portion of the canvas has been cut away, as I hope you can ascertain, even though it kind of isn't that clear. So the bottom part of this canvas is cut away, and attached to the center stretcher bar is a mirror. And when you're standing in front of this work, you are looking at your legs in that mirror. That's where it's positioned. That's the height that the painting is supposed to be hanging at on the wall. What you see in the painting is the profile of a person, but from behind. Their face has been muddied out with this brown paint, but you can kind of glean that there's one shoulder that's visible and one that has been cut away, and possibly a white collar. And so there you have this vestige of a human form, nicely dressed, maybe a white collar and a jacket, that's what that's signifying, but you're seeing them from behind, you're seeing this really chaotic image of them, and then ultimately you're seeing yourself. And so there's this really interesting play on your sense of body and your sense of performance in front of this work of art. Sarah Brahman. I love Sarah Brahman. I want more than anything to bring a work of hers up to Portland, Maine to put it on public view, because I love her work so much. There's something about seeing these works in person that really pulls at certain interests of mine as an aesthetic observer. What Sarah Brahman does is finds, buys, sources materials like the ones you see here. So we have a shelf, kind of a boring TV cabinet, and then what you can't see but you can see from behind is a vanity. So a bedroom vanity with a mirror. And Brahman attaches all of these items and then adds certain painted elements to the surface. These are not necessarily paintings, they're not necessarily sculptures, So they occupy this really interesting place that theoretically brings the viewer to an interesting conversation point. But that said, you have all of these different familiar furniture objects that you're walking around and seeing in very impossible angles were it not for this kind of chaotic mashup of them. So it's 2008. Mashup culture was definitely upon us in 2008. We are in it right now. So with this work, the reason I want so badly to show new work in this course is this course is designed to get you familiar with looking at art and trying to figure out why it's in front of you. And I just did that whole spiel about why this mass of objects is put together and sitting in this room, but all of you have done a really nice job of presenting your approaches to art in this course so far, and I want to get you up to speed so that if you see contemporary art like this, you won't just walk in and say, "I don't get it," and walk right back out. That you would sit in the room and for maybe not 40 minutes, but have an engagement with it, right? All right, Urs Fischer. Everything in this room is a mirrored cube, and on the surfaces of those mirrored cubes are printed photographs of items shot in a similar environment of a white gallery space. Those mirrored cubes are of a variety of different shapes and sizes. The objects printed on them are also blown up or presented at normal human scale. Generally they're blown up though. And so you're walking through this pylon of huge stuff, but you know it's not huge stuff because you can see yourself in it, so you know it's a mirrored box. And so it's this really fantastic play or fusion of Robert Morris's appropriation of the viewer's space in his very simple, minimal mirrored cube installation, and the appropriation of popular advertising material, popular culture that has been made kind of the mainstay of art practice for the last 30 years at this point. We're in 2009. A really lovely vestige of the human body, the human form in an image is this work by Jason Lazarus, a Chicago-based photographer. Jason Lazarus studied under a man named Robert Heineken in California at Art College. And when Heineken passed away, there was a conversation between his estate and Lazarus about what to do with his ashes, and in a series of photographs taken by Lazarus, who is an artist who often photographs his own body, he is throwing Heineken's ashes into the air, or maybe his estate or his family is doing this, but Heineken's ashes are entering into the air, and Lazarus is photographing them against the blue of the day sky. And so this photographer becomes a bit of a constellation, a marking in the cosmos. I love it. I really think this is a great homage to a really wonderful photographer. All right, here's a project by two guys, Ward Shelley and Doug Paulson, called Grow or Die. What you can't see is that this was installed in 2003 and also in 2011. The installation in 2011 is what is photographed here, and this is at the De Cordova Sculpture Garden in outside of Boston, which was a center that came up in a few of your texts, so some of you might recognize that name, De Cordova or De Cordova. Anyway, so Paulson and Shelley have this idea that they can get from the front door of the museum to the cafe without touching the ground. And they can do this by building a structure that they will live on until they get to that space. And that's exactly what they did. And here's one of the participants, Doug Paulson, actually building this structure. I gotta go fast. Mika Dejima, she takes cubicle structures and turns them into paintings and turns them into these sculptural things, kind of a la Sarah Brahman, but a little bit more minimalist and formal. This is what she did. Eric Lindman, cross, stretcher bars cut and then refused to make this shape. Yeah. And lastly, Ian Pedigo. I just found out how to say that guy's name. Ian Pedigo. Giving this really lovely work here when precipitation falls into concrete. I know I'm over an hour, but I want to talk about this real quick. Pedigo's sculptures always engage with natural materials or natural phenomena, and here he is engaging with the way that we see color and see light and see shapes, and where sculptures often engage with the physical body and make us move around and kind of leave color and that kind of theory to painting practice. Pedigo's bringing them together, and that's it. That's art up to today. I'm probably gonna, in my summation, which is also gonna be a lead-in to the final exam, I'm gonna talk to you about some really current things that I have seen in the last few weeks. So, on that note, that's it. See ya.